Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Phipps here, CEO of WealthShare, and joined today by my partners, Monique and Rodney. And we kind of put this together today, but it's been something that's been, very much talked about in the marketplace right now. There's a lot of volatility and fear and concern, and there's very good questions being asked. And we want to have a conversation from our side and just, open the dialogue and let you guys know kind of why we do things a certain way, but also address a lot of comments and things we're hearing in investor conversations. So thanks for being here, guys. I threw them on here at the last minute.
Throwing us under the bus there, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So I think just speaking generally, we hope to do more of this type of thing, right? Like the three of us are very much heads down every day and working and of course that will continue. But I think we all have a lot to contribute to the real estate investing community that I think is valuable. So I'll drag these guys out more and more, I think, on these things. And we're trying out some new platforms and stuff as well. But before we start, if you guys have questions, would love to hear them, comments. If you do not want them publicly, when you send it, I believe it goes to a private chat, or you can text my cell phone, 403-966-4949, if you have any questions you want to send, and we can address them. But first off, I think there is a difference between private lending and passive investments. And I think these get like put in one big category often, and everyone thinks of them just as private lending. So maybe we talk about that, briefly too, in terms of like, what is the difference between a private loan and a private investment? Monique, do you want to maybe talk about that from your perspective?
To start.
Yeah. I feel like you could give a good overview of this, but I'm happy to if you want.
No, it's all good. It's all good. With regard to private lending, there are certain things that an individual like ourselves, because we do private lending as ourselves, that we need to be very careful of and take cognizance of, in the sense that a lot of the private lending that's out in the marketplace right now is on a face value prom note, unsecured. You basically provide a loan to somebody and they promise to pay you a certain amount back plus interest over the specified time as per the prom note.
Right.
And that can get a lot of people into trouble. And we see that tonight. We see that today, right now. We're picking it up every single day when we open up our phones. There's a new one. Somebody's actually gone into some form of trouble because the prom notes are unsecured and people are actually losing their money. Another way of providing your hard-earned cash is actually going into passive investment. And passive investment is a much more secure way for the individual to earn the return that they're wanting. Mm-hmm. Basically, you're going to get it with your prom note in form of interest, or you're going to get it in the form of a distribution or a redemption or something of that nature if you do it as a passive investment. Passive, once again, it's all down to the individual's risk profile or how they deem their risk. And looking at the appetite in the market today, everybody doesn't want that risk anymore. It's just too risky, and passive investment is actually the better way of going. We've got a couple of ways where you can do passive investment. One is through the REIT itself, where you can actually invest over a long period of time, and then you can get cash distributions from that, as well as your investment increases. Very similar to a mutual fund. In fact, it is. You could consider a REIT as a mutual fund, but at least a mutual fund in the real estate and not a mutual fund in some stock exchange where the volatility is a lot more, moving up and down. Or another way where you can passively invest, which is also very secure, is where you actually invest into a particular project, an asset. Right. And that asset is in a corporation, whether it's a corporation like shares or whether it's a limited partnership where you get LP units. That is a lot more secure. I know Natasha and I were talking earlier today, funny enough, on what are the tax benefits of this?
A huge question. Like I don't think enough people, when we're like, we all get excited to invest, right? And then
Yeah, because we're all going to be earning a little bit of money.
tells me, oh, I didn't think of that through, right? So yes, everybody listen loud and clear. This is really good advice when you look at this from a tax perspective. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all good. I mean, Natasha and I were talking about this earlier today, where we were trying to get an understanding of why people love prom notes so much. And prom notes is where you get interest. They basically, somebody promises you that you'll get your principal back, plus you'll get an interest. Now that interest is 100% taxable, because you're going to get that interest. You have to add it onto your tax returns, and it's going to be part of your tax calculation. So basically 100% of that is added. Whereas with passive investment, it's capital in nature. So if you actually earn, if you invest in an LP, for example, and you invest, argument's sake, $50,000. And one of the redemption rates is after 12 months, we'll give you the $50,000 back, plus we'll give you a redemption rate of $3,000, for argument's sake. So basically, after 12 months, you're going to get $53,000 back. The $50,000 that you're going to get back is capital. You're not going to be paying any tax on that. But the $3,000 is a capital gain. And we all know when it comes to capital gains, only 50% thereof is added onto your taxable income. So versus a promissory note of an interest where you're paying 100%, or take a capital gain, which is 50%. You borrowed that money against your line of credit 9 out of 10 times. I mean, we all do it. We use our HELOC, and we actually use that for passive investment purposes, for the purposes of earning an income. And we write off that interest because it was generating an income for that purpose.
Right.
You still write off 100% of that interest, but you're only paying 50% on the capital gain because 50% is not tax inclusive. So passive investment is the way to go. It's the most secure way to go. And from a tax liability point of view, you pay less tax. And I don't think a lot of people realize the benefits of passive investing versus going the unsecured route of a prom note, for example. Sorry, I might have actually got a little bit too long on that, but
no, I think that was
important.
Good.
Well, and I was just going to add to that is I think why the language matters so much. I think a lot of people are approaching this space and kind of throwing everything into a pile. I'm a lender, I'm an investor, I'm a this, like it's all kind of getting them together. The language is very important. You're an investor. It comes with subscription documents. It comes with security. It comes with, oversight. There's a securities commission. There is a lot more that goes into that process. And there are a lot more rules that you have to abide by. Promissory notes, while they make sense, and I'm sure all of us have done them, and a lot of us will continue to do them in one shape or another, it is a space that does not come with the same oversight. It does not come with the same regulation, and does not come with the same security. And sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes you need a quicker access. Sometimes you want to take a bigger risk with some of your fund. That's totally within every investor's right. What you have to understand is those two things are not created equal. The language is different for a reason, and it's because the playing field is different. And I think that's one of the things that we hope to show with things like the REIT is that the language, the time in, the definitions, all those things, it's really important that they're understood and the time's taken to understand them, so that you're in a position when you're putting your hard-earned money to work that you know exactly the risk, but also the separation of things like the tax incentives or penalties, but also the security, whether it exists or not, whether there is oversight, whether there is any sort of what happens if something goes wrong, right? Because as much as we all have I don't believe anybody's coming to this with bad intentions. The best intentions and the best planning, sometimes, things happen that you cannot predict. So what happens in the worst case scenario? What is my recourse? And that changes from every document. And even within investing, different subscription documents have different clauses, have different subsets of information. And that's the language is just very important.
I've got a couple questions from folks this is a little bit new to them.
Absolutely.
So just quickly, what we're talking about today is we want to compare promissory note type of lending compared to private securities or passive investments, because they are getting kind of, I think, lumped into one right now. So a promissory note is a very simple sort of document in terms of a loan, like Monique described. Whereas what we would call passive investment is an investment into some type of private security, whether you're buying shares from a corporation or commonly LPGP structure. One thing to note is even if you are raising capital with promissory notes, the security laws still apply to you. Yeah. So things like how you can advertise, what you can say, ensuring suitability, there is responsibility on you that I do think isn't being talked about enough. And on the responsibility of people raising capital, I do think we need to be talking more about suitability. So, having those conversations where if someone, as an example, I've had this one come up several times, raising capital. You'll have a conversation with an investor, and everyone has different needs and goals and timelines and whatever. So you learn about them. And some people will be like, they really need monthly payments, for example. What that tells me is they're likely borrowing the money out of their HELOC, which is fine, and then doing some sort of private investment with it, whether it's a promissory note or even a private security investment. They're allowed to do that. But if they are putting themselves at risk, if there is not monthly payments, then the discussion and thought about suitability should be brought up. And I don't hear the word suitability enough out there. I really don't. We talk about it a lot. I talk about it a lot in like one-on-one conversations. And that's one thing I really wanted to highlight tonight. And I hope that term starts getting used more is this suitable? And the really great thing about WealthShare or other groups like us that have the structure that we have third-party exempt market dealers that ensure suitability for our investors. That's their job. That is, really their role. And they are very good at their job, but they're there to ensure that you're investing in something that makes sense for you and having a third-party independent look at that. June just made a really good comment saying, yes, 100% agree. Risk tolerance is directly rated to suitability. And then even in that, everybody has their own tolerance, right?
Exactly.
What I find tolerable might be very different than what Monique does.
It likely is.
It is.
Well, and what I find tolerable is different from both of you as well. I mean, I love crypto. I love some of these wilder investments.
Yeah.
It's not just suitability to the risk of that investment, but it's suitability to the risk of your investment portfolio. So as much as I love crypto and these other, I'm come from the entertainment space. I love a risk is part of the game, but it's not all of the game. It has to be part of your game. It can't be all of it if you're going to balance the risk mitigation and have an assumable risk. It's something that you're comfortable with. It's not keeping you up at night. And those riskier endeavors, I go into them basically kissing the money goodbye as soon as it's in there, because that's the attitude I feel I have to take it to be appropriately invested in that space. But that's not all of my investment. It never will. It'll never come close to that. And that's a part of the suitability is how much of it are you putting into these things? You work so hard to save the money, to earn the money, to have the money to invest, that you want to make sure that you're balancing that with what it's taken you to get that money, what you put your heart and soul into to get there. And that, I think, on the other side of that, you want to have people that are equally as invested and have gone through equal amounts of pain to prepare an investment that is worthy of your money, right? It's, our particular structure is not an easy one to put together. We've all lost some sleep getting it there, but going through
I've gone way in the process. I mean, look at me.
So bad.
It was bright red. Just
with the screen behind me.
But if you're not, that I believe that process. I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think we've all shared the sentiment that if we don't go through that and really almost sweat out the fine print, and understand the responsibility that we're taking on by taking investors' money, that we only by doing that are we comfortable then having the suitability conversation to begin with, because then we know what we've gone through and that's how we present it. And I think that that's an important part of it. And I like I said, I think that people's intentions are always start off, well, everybody wants to win. No one's going out there to try to sink their ship, right? No. They're taking people's money and investment with the best case scenario in mind. But if they're not going through the same struggle to provide the right or the pain or the thought of providing an investment vessel that protects both their investors and themselves, then that should be part of the consideration of how much of your portfolio you're willing to put into something. How easy is it to put in there, and how hard is it to, say goodbye to that money? Those things are part of the decision making. I think, I think, anyways. And I'm probably the most aggressive investment of the three of us. So
And I'm the least.
The least.
I'm the least. Rodney's the most, and Natasha's just even killed.
Yeah, that's why you're the CEO. That's why you're the CEO. You're the boss.
I do want to kind of tie suitability together with these like types of investments and investors might be looking at. When a monthly interest payment, or however it's structured, is being given, we have to also think about what risk that places on your own investment. And obviously for the investor placing the money, especially if it's coming from a HELOC, or even if it's not, that monthly sort of payment is nice. But you also have to think about the risk that places on the project or the investment that you are investing in, because if something goes wrong, or there's a late payment, or rent comes in later, all kinds of things could happen in 30-day period. You are, exposed to a lot more risk, I would think. But Monique, I don't know, maybe from your side too, in terms of like risk mitigation, like having a monthly interest payment and then also trying to manage a project or a building or an asset, like even from an accounting perspective, it's a little bit more uncertain, right?
It's daunting, purely because you've got a commitment.
Yeah.
And we all know each month is not the same month. It's not like having a salary every month and where you're going to have X amount every single month. This is all dependent. I mean, we specialize in the real estate where we have rental income. Now, we also know that tenants come and go. So it just fluctuates. And if you've got these commitments coming through, and then all of a sudden you do not have the income, because not only do you have these interest payments, you've also got a bridge loan payment possibly to cover. You've got property expenses to cover. I mean, life happens. Even in the real estate, we all experience this, where all of a sudden a tenant phones you up and said, my water tank is not working. All of a sudden, you've got that expense of a water tank.
I had that this week.
That was this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had it today, where my furnace just all of a sudden just decided to go, well, hello, the exhaust motor doesn't want to work anymore. I mean, it happens. And if you've got these interest payments on a monthly basis going through, as an accountant or as a CFO in my position, you have to make a decision. Do you keep this property going, or do you not pay the investor or the person that you promised to pay a monthly interest for? And that is where the trouble starts happening, because you have this commitment. Hence why we, as a team, we always say we do not do monthly payments, purely because of the unexplained or the eventual expense that might actually happen. Because it's not if, it's when. Face it.
Yeah.
And then you always have to have, I mean, with us, I can be honest with you, we always make sure that we have a minimum of 3 months worth of cash flow for operation purposes. Minimum requirement, because we know life happens, and it even happens with us. It happens in our personal capacity. You just need to make sure you've got that buffer. And if you're going to use that 3 months worth of operating to pay interest, you've got yourself into a big, big set of trouble.
And that's with us, with a cash generating business from the minute we take hold, where there is cash flow, there's cash generation. So on top of our cash generation, we're keeping that in reserve. So if you're looking at things like a development project where there is no cash flow, there is different things happening where you're adding on to it. There are some big funds out there that deliver cash flow on a monthly basis, but they have such a large asset base and such a large cash flow and they're doing a much smaller percentage of that total return over the year. So they're going 2%. That's not 2% a month. That's 2% annually, or 3% annually. And that's getting distributed. That's because they have cash flow that allows them to distribute some of that money, and they have such a big fund. And to that part, and this is an area where I get very passionate about, because I come from time in the a startup community in Calgary, tech startup, music business startup, restaurant startup. the number one most consistent failure piece is running out of time. It is the number one killer of everybody with the good idea. People have great ideas, great plans, great teams, and they run out of time. So burn rate, whatever the language you want to use, just because we're in real estate, it does not mean you are not a startup. You are still a startup. You still have a burn rate. You still have capital, and you absolutely can run out of time. And that is the number one killer. So if you start adding monthly payments in as part of your offer, for example, what you're doing is adding fuel to the burn rate of your project. And so for me, I get to take a step back and I look at it. Well, I've worked with some great initiatives. Some of them haven't worked. And it was because they ran out of time. I believe they were onto something. I believe there's space in the market for what they were doing, but they ran out of time. If they had added having to pay back their investors on a monthly basis, we would have barely gotten our foot in the door before the lights were shut off. And some of the other initiatives where I've seen make sense, and one of our new trustees we're excited to announce soon, who's done this repeatedly with successful businesses and is doing it again, was able to position the company so that the burn rate was able to stretch out as long as possible to buy them the time to get this idea or this business proposal off the ground. We are no different. We are a startup company. Everybody investing in real estate or building or whatever, it's still a startup business. It is just because you see the building or you see the land that it's going to get built on doesn't mean you're not a startup. There is a business and there is the real estate. There are still two separate things. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. You can tell every once in a while I get a big.
But this gives you a good indication what our discussions are like.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what our meetings are like. We'll let you guys in on them more, but just there was a question quickly before I move on and June just said, very good point, Rodney. Mo asked, can you also do that within a holding company? I'm assuming he was asking if a holding company can invest into private securities. I'm thinking because that was a little bit ago when we were talking about that.
If that's the case, if you've got a holding company, you can invest in anything if you so choose, or you can use one of your own subsidiaries. It depends how you've structured your corporations from an investment point of view. But even for us, if we look from a holding company point of view, I mean, all our assets are basically in like a designated subsidiary, so to speak. The principle is still exactly the same. From a passive investment point of view, if you take WealthShare REIT, for example, and they invest in WealthShare Alberta and then WealthShare Stillwaters, or even Pyrite for that matter, where it's still passive of nature and it's all dependent on the performance of those LPs. And if we had those monthly interest rates because of the project, we would not be getting the returns that we were getting right now if we had that.
Yeah.
So that's why whenever people need to look at private lending versus passive investment, as I mentioned, the risk profile is one of them and suitability of the risk profile. But at the same time is your time span. What is your time span? I mean, you need to look at investments and say, right, if this investment is only going to give me a return, but I know I'm going to get a return purely because it's been invested properly, and I can wait a year, then it's fine. But if you're an investor where you are so dependent on some form of monthly cash flow, then this type of investment is not suitable for you. But yeah, it is concerning, especially what's happening today, and it's actually caught up. Life has caught up with everybody with regard to private lending, because the interest rates over the last 2 years has now finally nipped everybody in the butt.
Yeah.
And you're seeing the impact of it, because it's now getting to the point, and I may be out of line saying this, but it's now getting to the point where these developers or other funds that's doing this type of private lending is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. And it's going to continue till it's going to get to the point where they cannot do that anymore because nobody's prepared to put more money in from a promissory note point of view.
And that's what we talked about, the things that you can't predict, right? Yes, I think most people understood that interest rates were going to rise. They were historically low. It was free money for a shortage of time. But the most basics of economics will tell you that is not going to last, and there is a elastic band effect that comes out of that. So yes, we should have had some understanding, but the variance, the degree of the speed, all those things are things that we, potentially couldn't necessarily exactly predict. And then what's the fallout of that? What are all the different things that come out of it, right? So the best laid plans. Like, I think it's important, like, we are speaking to this because it's important to us as investors and also as fundraisers. But these groups are not like, no one's doing this to try to lose. There's not a single person out there that is trying to take someone's money and then sink it, because they're sinking their own project as well. Like, it cannot be an easy discussion. And I think for the most part, people's intentions are always very strong. So it's not in any way to throw someone under the bus or to, kind of point a finger. It's to grow the awareness as a whole and to grow the understanding as a whole, and hope that everybody that is making a decision is making it as educated as possible. And there is a place for risky investments. There is a place for, bigger swings. It hopefully is in a portion, an understood portion of your portfolio. Our concern, I believe, and once again, I'm speaking for all three of us, and I'm not trying to, but our concern is that if you are taking those big swings, you understand that you're taking the big swing and you understand the risk that comes with it. And as long as you understand those things and are okay with it, great, swing away.
Yeah.
When people are taking the big swings but are associating the risk with something completely different, or believing that the risk is something completely different, that's when as a human, I get very concerned. Yeah. Because the two are not equal. There's a reason why the home runs come with a big return and this slow and steady comes with a lower return, because the risk.
Right. Well, and that leads into a very good point of when you're analyzing these types of investments. Like, I've had conversations with many investors go, well, so-and-so is targeting this return, so I'm going there. Yeah. And that's fine. But you also have to think about, if you're building a portfolio, whether it's passive or active and everything in between, ideally, you're trying to diversify that portfolio as much as possible, right? So for WealthShare, we want to be the kind of slow, boring thing. We're making money from day one. We're buying pretty well turnkey assets. And we want to be that kind of boring thing in your portfolio. But we also know that most, well-balanced portfolios have those slivers of high-risk things. The concern is that that's not being talked about, or that the suitability is not being talked about. And something that is targeting a very high return likely has a whole lot more variables than buying an asset that's already rented and we're going to take it over and manage it to the best of our ability, right? Whereas if you're buying a piece of land, you're rezoning, you're developing, you've got years of variables that we can't guarantee. And there's nothing wrong with going for those, but they just come with a different level of risk and reward as well, potential reward, but also potential loss. So I think, that's important to understand. One's not right or wrong. It's just
exactly
understanding what makes sense and what you need in your portfolio.
Exactly. And that the Warren Buffett, but great, obviously great, one of the greatest investors of all time. A few books out there, a lot of understanding, a lot of catchphrases. When everyone's scared, that's when you invest, and when everyone's investing, that's when you take a step back. Whatever it is, there's a laundry list of them. But the one that's always stuck with me is the 85-15. There's probably a few different quoted percentages out there, but I've always lived by the 85-15. I remember when I was younger going 15% in the risky stuff. Are you crazy? That is so low. Like, let's go 50-50 or something, right? But
I'm in that 85-15.
Yeah, I'd be amazed if I could get you to 85 or past. Like, I feel like getting you to 15% would be something. But what he would do, or some of the the anecdotal stories, and this is how I've approached some of the more riskier investments we have, is you take the investment, and what he would do, he invest in a private company or something. He's good. 85% of his portfolio, the things that he can predict, and it just stays there, and it just stays time and market. They talk about that real estate all the time. And then the 15%, he would invest in the company, throw it in a drawer, and forget about it. Whether it was 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I can only imagine how many files he's thrown in that drawer that have burned up, and he's never thought about it again, and no one's ever seen or heard from it again. But occasionally he'll get a phone call. We sold the company. Here, pull your stocks out. You're getting a check. So he rifles through. Oh yeah, here we go. There it is. Send me the check. And but he's not any more energetic about the return than he is upset about the loss, because he knows 50%, 15%, not 50, 50 was me, 15% of his portfolio was in that high risk, and he could just set it and forget it. And forget it a lot of the time. And just as well with the returns, he wasn't going in like, doing a trip around the world every time one of them hit, because he knew for everyone that hit, there was a bunch that went on his side. But that was okay. That was part of the balance of a portfolio. And I think now once we get into balanced portfolio, that's probably a discussion for another day. But as you can tell, I've got no shortage of opinions.
Yeah. That is such a good thing to remind ourselves about, because we also, a lot of real estate investors were entrepreneurs. We have this shiny penny syndrome. We're always like, look at what's next, and look at what's coming. And there's a lot of amazing things we could all be doing. But remembering those balance and what works for you is in terms of high risk versus lower risk. Maria says, I think based on the current environment, slow and boring is becoming a lot more popular. And Rodney actually made a good point the other day, but I'll maybe let you make it, Rodney, in terms of like how long we've been investing as a population. But like I have certainly like lost investors because the paperwork was too complicated. Like they'd rather go to the one-page simple IOU. Like we may as well just write it on a napkin and they'll just hand it to you, because at the end of the day, a promissory note that's not secured against an asset, you can secure promissory notes against something as well, which is, something you can do, but a lot of it out in the world is unsecured. And so if you can secure it and there's something to secure it to, absolutely. But if you're not willing to take the time to read the paperwork and you're going to give someone, 6 figures of money, that is concerning as well, right? And also from the person who's raising capital side, if they're not looking at all the different pros and cons of the way they could structure their offering or their opportunity, that's on them as well. This needs to be both sides of this equation. I think taking responsibility for what questions they could and couldn't ask. And if they don't know the questions to ask, then let's get educated about it first.
Yeah, exactly. It should be a two-way street. Your investment should be, you should feel just as comfortable with the person you're investing in as they are in you. If they're not asking questions about you as an investor and checking to make sure that it fits what you're doing, I believe part of your success, Natasha, I've seen is from the bench largely over the last, decade, in residential investment and smaller investments to bigger investments to real estate investors of varying sizes, is that you've always started in, where does this investment fit for you? And if it didn't fit for them, you weren't selling them something. You were waiting till the time was right, or maybe the time was never right. And that would mean, maybe that meant that person didn't invest, but you were taking the time to make sure that investment fit. And that should be the case across all the board. It should be that it should be everywhere. We all, we talk about time and market. Like that's the thing with real estate. If you're trying to get a quick fix out of it, then you need to look at quick fix investments. And the person that's taking your money should be also just as concerned about it being a quick return and quick in and out, or whatever it is, if that fits. Now, I largely would not suggest that for real estate, but that's not, that is to everybody's decision. But it should, the two-way street should be, equally aligned in what's best for you. And to your point earlier about like, I from the outside, like historically, real estate investing is still a very new concept to humans as a whole, to society as a whole. To a lot of the world, real estate investing is still not an option. It's still a very tertiary idea. So in the communities and the markets where real estate investing does exist, and it is a part of a portfolio, it's still relatively new. It's still a couple generations at most, a part of something that could be available to the average person. So we're still figuring this out as a society, really, as a now that's another soapbox and another kind of thing, but it's true. It's true. Our grandparents did not have the conversation around real estate investing. There was real estate; it existed to a degree. It was your house. It was your thing. There was something outside of that. But that's just our grandparents. There wasn't projects, and it was real estate investing was for a certain valued elite or nobility, if you go back far enough, or whatever it might be. And in still a large portion of the world, real estate investing isn't even an option. Housing is ownership period is still an issue. This is such a new concept that that there's going to be growing pains. There's going to be, unfortunately, stuff. And for us to be the boring part of the portfolio and to that comments thing that's becoming more interesting. That's not what we want. We don't want people to lose money to then go to the boring thing, but it's boring for a reason. Mm-hmm. and you know, the fact that I'm so passionate about the boring stuff tells you a lot about it, because I am the high risk guy. So if I'm passionate about boring, there's got to be a reason. You know.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about passive investing as well. Like to your point, Rodney, not everybody can afford to buy a home in their personal capacity, let alone a rental income property. And this is a beautiful mechanism where they can actually be part of owning property.
Yeah.
So, and it is, and it's, yeah, I can see it in my son. You know, he's in that generation right now where looking to buy a house, by the time he actually thinks he's saved up the down payment, he probably has to save up double that, because the pricing of housing has gone up and the down payment requirements have changed. Mm-hmm. And this is a perfect way for everybody that's in that bucket, or for lack of a better way of putting it, that they can actually be, you know, passively invest in this and be part of something that grows, and they can get a return from that at the same time.
Yeah, and also be part of their net asset, right?
Steady.
Yeah, and be part of their net asset. So when they does come time to buy, it's not just what they have in their savings; it's part of their portfolio. The bank looks at the whole picture. So you're holding, however big or small, within a REIT like ours or other ones out there, whether they're buy and hold, whether they're mortgage-based funds, whatever it is, that holding that you have, that holistic picture is part of how what could eventually help you get into your own home ownership. For the younger generation, that is a very the discussion that boomers have had around home ownership, and the discussion that this generation right now, just entering the workforce, is having, could not be more different. It could not be more different. And if the game is not the same, and it may never be the same again. So having that and that's another one. Sorry, another tangent.
That's another one, yeah.
We could speak for an hour on that. Yeah,
well,
don't get me started, but
more of these.
We'll do a lot more of these, but it's important that it's all part of it's all part of the pieces. This is still a new, you know, there's still so much to figure out, right? And we, all three of us, are also learning as we go. Everything that we learn, we catalog, and we're going to make mistakes. Even the slow and steady does not come without, like, risk-free. It's not like we're sitting here when there's no risk to what we're doing. There absolutely is. We're trying to find the most minimal risk and the best return. There is not a single thing out there that is without risk. It all has risk. It's all a balanced risk. You know, there could be an earthquake and our buildings fall into the, you know, there's always something. Now, that, you know, there's nothing perfect, but there is levels. There is a degree.
The more variables, the more risk. That's very simply put. That's how it works. And if you're going to invest in something with more variables, you should expect a higher return. I want to pivot quickly to OPM, other people's money. They're, you know, I remember when I first heard this term, I was like very perplexed. And I think around that time, I had just done my first joint venture, like, partnership. Yeah. And it was kind of like making this like trendy, like cool thing, like OPM, right? And you still see this today. And which it works in terms of using, you know, other people's money if you're bringing something different to the table. And there's some amazing joint ventures out there. And joint ventures are a great way to go to if you're limited in one of those two areas. We love joint ventures, and think that, like, people have also stopped talking about joint ventures. Now it's all private lending, which just reminds you that these things come and go, and there's cycles and trends, and you know what's kind of hot right now. But when it comes to kind of how it can look with OPM, sometimes it comes across like it's not being taken seriously enough. And if you are raising capital, if you are doing a project and you want to raise funds, people will invest with you based on, like, they'll look at the project, of course, and they should ask all the right questions, but they will also invest with you. A huge reason, and the largest reason, is they believe in you and they believe in your ability to execute this. So your reputation is everything. And, you know, the suitability of the funds you're taking in, are you able to execute what you're what you are doing. And I feel like there's some, paths we see out there that are very almost loosey-goosey, like take the money in, go buy the real estate, learn as you go kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit scary. And that brings us all down when it's not being taken seriously enough. At least for me personally, I am the type of person, like, I won't speak on something until I'm confident on it. I will not take someone's money to do something unless I'm extremely confident. And I would lose sleep. I do lose sleep if I'm ever worried about something. So we need to be talking about suitability. We need to be ensuring that we are taking people's money seriously. And if you are investing, asking the difficult questions, if they're not prepared to give you good answers to difficult questions, then, that should be a red flag.
Right? Tell you everything you need to know.
Exactly. I did have one person send me a question asking, like, well, what questions should I ask? To like
all of them.
to see, but people don't know, like, they don't know what to ask, right? I think one thing that there's a lot of things to ask, but one thing that people are not asking about is how much other funds have been taken in for this particular project. Because when you're raising with promissory notes, it's not like you can go pull title and check 5 mortgages or something, right? And they look at their investment, they look at their project, but what is the whole picture?
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to ask those questions. Also ask for references. We always provide references for anyone who asks for them. And I think we should be asking more of that. But if you're not feeling comfortable with the answers you're getting, also be asking what plan A, B, and C is. Like when Monique does her financial modeling, which would be a great event to do sometime too, is we have best case, average case, and worst case. And we need to be okay with worst case.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. It can't just be one case. It can't just be, that's the only case that works. Because as we've talked about, all kinds of things can go wrong.
Yeah.
So ask those questions too, right?
Yeah, I think that'll be one of our next sessions, is just the difference between those, and why if we're evaluating a property, it doesn't hit worst case scenario for our bottom line, is then we have to move on to the next thing. If we can hit best case scenario,
there's always another deal.
Yeah. There's always another deal, and time, like, once again, that's this time and market thing. Like, there's always another deal. There's always another thing. If you have to be in it to you have to get married to these projects. You have to, because otherwise you're stacking the variables against yourself, right? So that's part of what, why we do that. And I think that's a whole, that'll be a session that we do very soon. Yeah. Because that's a very important one, and that's one of the biggest questions you have to ask, and that's one of the number one questions. And if we're unable to answer the questions, we do not feel comfortable taking your money. Like, that's something that I think we share, is like we have to be comfortable lifting up the hood and looking inside and answering the tough questions and being prepared when we make the mistakes, because we've made them before and we'll make them again. Anyone who says they don't is lying to you. That it's impossible to not make a mistake. We're all humans, but are we prepared for the mistakes?
It's not all sunshine and roses.
And what do we do when we make the mistakes? How do we respond to the mistakes? Those are things. What are you gonna, like, that's a question. No one asked that question. What are you gonna do when you fuck up? What is your response gonna be? What are you gonna do when you make a mistake? Because you're absolutely going to. But no one asked that question because no one intends to make a mistake, but you are going to. Absolutely. So what is your pivot going to be? What is your response? How are you going to adjust accordingly? What is your plan? What is your worst case scenario? What are you going to do when the worst case scenario happens? Whatever it is, right? And those aren't fun conversations. Nobody wants to have that conversation. But if you don't want to have that conversation,
this is how trust is built. Like, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of investor conversations, and if you're raising capital, you have to be okay to have these types of conversations and open yourself up to questioning, because at the end of the day, if they're not comfortable, either they're not going to invest, and if they do invest and they're not comfortable, it's not going to end well, right? It's just going to end in a poor result. So yeah,
and I think that's why we enjoy the model so much, because we might love the building, we love the location, we love the building and everything else. The model actually takes the emotion out of it completely.
Yeah. Well, and to that, you're uncomfortable investor. So if you put yourself on the other side of it, if you're raising capital, your uncomfortable investor is going to be your squeakiest wheel most of the time. So taking out of real estate and now going into some of these other these higher risk, tech startups or other things. There's, you might have 50 core investors. It's almost an inside joke that your squeakiest wheel is going to be the one that invested the least. That's going to be the one that calls you the most. That's going to be the one that's checking up and questioning your decisions and constantly rattling the cage, because they're the one that is the most uncomfortable with their investment. So their how uncomfortable they are is going to reflect on their space within your interactions and allowing you to go about you executing in the vision that you've communicated to them. And it is like a running joke within the startup community. That is almost invariably the chance. And that's why, when we first talked about starting a REIT, some of the people I talked to said, you want to deal with 150 investors at minimum?
Yeah.
Phone calls you're going to get, but if we can't deal with 150, how can I deal with one?
Exactly.
Like that's the concept. But the comfortability that is a real thing, because it's been proven time and time again that most likely the person with the least invested is the most uncomfortable with their investment. And that's really
the questions they ask are important, though.
Exactly.
The person who is speaking up the most, that tells you what you need to be doing better at as well.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Like, how can you make things more clear? How can you provide the information better? And that's something we're constantly working on, is like better communication, getting things out there better. It's hard when you're in it all day, but you also need to be available and providing that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was a really good point. What else did I have wrote down? Paperwork. If you're making an investment, you should get the documents reviewed by a lawyer. If it's especially if this is brand new space to you. Like people ask me all the time, is it okay? I'm like, of course it's okay. Like, go.
Encouraged. Not only is it okay, it's encouraged.
And it's encouraged. And I actually love hearing what feedback comes back from the lawyers. It helps us learn what we can make more clear, what we can be more informative on certain things. So absolutely, you should be spending the time to get these investments reviewed by someone that is not involved in the deal.
And someone that's qualified. There's a bit of a thing there where you go ask somebody that isn't qualified, that doesn't have experience for their feedback. Well, their feedback might not be relevant if they've never invested before in anything, or they're not involved in the space, and you're asking their feedback. Well, like that's why you go to a lawyer, someone with history, an expert, because they are looking at it with the right pair of eyes. Mm-hmm. If you go to, maybe it's a parent or a sibling or something, and someone that you believe in and you trust, but doesn't have any experience in it, well, their feedback is not really relevant. Because it comes from a point of concern, perhaps, and hopefully so, if it's someone you care about. But it's not coming from a place of education or experience. So that's why we always suggest, absolutely encourage to speak to a lawyer, have these documents reviewed by a professional. There is a cost associated with that. If you're not wanting to spend the money getting the investment vetted,
that is a good point.
That should tell you a lot about where your comfort level is in actually doing the investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. There's going to be costs associated with investing, and there should be.
Sure.
Okay, we've been on for about 50 minutes. I want to bring up one more thing before we kind of wrap this up. And it's, again, in the kind of vein of suitability. We talked a little bit about suitability earlier, but I want to talk about the definitions of accredited versus an eligible investor and why they exist and who define them. Because
and it's not something that you apply for.
That's exactly it.
You don't get a card. You don't get a certificate.
I want a card. The reason this is so important to understand for us as issuers, as well as on the lending side. So the definitions of accredited versus eligible, you can Google it. You can look it up. You either fall into the category or you don't. And the reason these definitions are important is the legislation defines what should be a suitable investment for accredited investor, and not just the type of investment, but also the amount of investment, and what should be suitable for an eligible investor in Canada, and the amount that is suitable for them to be investing per year. That's not something I've defined or Monique's defined, or it's the definition in Canada. And it's important to give some thought to this. if there is certain investments that are accredited investors only, there's a reason for that. They're higher risk likely. They, require a higher level of understanding in the investment space. If you go to do even a larger investment in a promissory note space, let's say, there is no discussion of this is for accredited investors or eligible, but there should be. There absolutely should be, and that's not being it's like not even thought about because it's peer to peer, and which is right. You don't need to sign the same documents that we do, but we should be giving some thought as to why these definitions exist.
Yeah.
And why they've been laid out. And they've been laid out to protect consumers, to protect the public, and make sure that they're not making investments that they may not understand or that are just too high risk for what their tolerance is. So the definition of accredited investor, you can look it up. It's not something that you need a card for or someone to approve you for, but you have to meet certain financial criteria. And when you go to make an investment in a private security, there are private securities that are open to just accredited investors, and there's ones that are open, like WealthShare REIT, to accredited and eligible investors. And so it's important that you understand where you lie in this space. You do not need to show proof of this to the issuer, but you need to say, and I need to ask you the question, or our exempt market dealer asks you the question, I should say, to figure out which one of these you qualify for. And that exercise is there for a very good reason. And if you're not sure, the exempt market dealers are there to actually have those conversations with you as well. So it's not the issuer who's trying to raise money. It's an independent person who's going to help you determine which one of these you are. And I think we need to be talking about that more as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that because I spoke earlier about the pain people go through to develop an investment or put together an investment. We went through exponentially more discomfort, you can say, to provide an investment that was for eligible as well as accredited. So the pain point from being just for accredited to then accredited and eligible was significant. We went through an offering memorandum that is very long and very detailed. We went through the REIT structure to provide that offering memorandum so that the pain putting that together allowed us to take in investors that have a lower threshold for risk, right? So the pain equals the threshold in this instance. So people that are falling under eligible, generally speaking, have a lower threshold for risk because they have
and a lower net worth.
And a lower net. That's exactly why they have a lower threshold, because they have a lower net worth. So the investment vessel, like ours or other ones out there like us, should have a higher threshold to go through the pain to earn the right to take in the investment from someone that has a lower threshold for tolerance. That's so right. When I'm talking about pain, it should be pain on the issuer side, because the trust that's required, the threshold of tolerance for risk is lower because the net worth is lower. So that person's risk tolerance and their ability to invest comes with more pain to that investor because they have less to invest with. So the pain should be on both sides. It should be an equal understanding, an equal effort. And when you get into the promissory note space, that no longer exists. And that's one of the differentiators. That's why the language matters. That's why we're having this conversation, I think, in the beginning. We are prepared to go through the pain for
pain and cost and
startup and gray hairs, all of it, because we know those eligible investors are trusting us with a large portion of their risk tolerance. So that's we believe that we should earn that right, and that we should pay for that right, and we should go through the pain of that right. And I believe that if you're an investor, you should have that same feeling that the people you're investing in are prepared to go through the pain of earning the right to, use your money to fulfill their vision. That's right. I just wanted to revisit that pain concept, because I don't want it to get misconstrued of just pain and slamming your head against the wall pain. That's another type of pain. We've also dealt with that, and we'll talk about that in another day.
Thanks, Rodney, for letting me relive that again.
Yeah, that is also a very real pain, and it exists. And
oh yeah, it was. Putting my mind back, it was incredibly painful, so that we could actually put that in place, so that eligible investors could actually have an opportunity to invest as well.
Yeah, Yeah, we earn that. We believe we're earning that right to take in. We're earning the responsibility, because that's what it is. It's a responsible. We take in your investment, anyone's investment. We are taking in a responsibility, and we should feel like we've earned the right to take that in our experience and our effort, but also just in the process, like going through that OM is long. I'll buy someone a very nice bottle of wine if they've read every word in that OM, and they should. Because that's if we have multiple times.
And just imagine when we go to Quebec.
Yeah. Once we translate that into French, that'll be a fun one. That's another conversation again.
That's another conversation.
6 different conversations coming.
I think to kind of tie a bow on it, the founders of WealthShare, our value proposition was to appeal to as many people as possible, as safely as possible, and provide as much security as possible. That's really what we are trying to do. That we cannot eliminate risk altogether, but we are trying to limit it and remove as many variables as we can. When we first started WealthShare, no one knew what the heck a mutual fund trust was or an MFT was. Now it's changed a lot, but the reality is to accept investment from both of these things, you do need the offering memorandum as well. And that is a step that really, truly shows the commitment to longevity, in my opinion, because it is a big step. It's a big process and a big expense. And we are here for the long term. This is not just we set this up to do one quick project and now we're on our way. We are here for the long term. We want our investors to be excited about that longevity with us. I think we're approaching maybe 250 investors in the WealthShare REIT now, which is very exciting. And we want to be that safe, boring thing in your portfolio. If we ever pivot to anything, in the future, it'll be a separate thing. Yeah. WealthShare as a fund right now will stay in the buy and hold category. And we, will be continuing to sharing what we are learning along the way.
Yeah. So, well, and that was just the last thing, as you mentioned, that like if we got involved in something, let's say development or lending down the road, which potentially we could, if we can't prove concept with the safest and the most boring, how can we pretend to do it in the other way? Exactly. It seems to be people start with the high risk and then work their way back to the buy and hold, but should be the other way around. You got to walk before you run, right? Like it's a very basic principle. So if we will prove it with this, and then we will look at that.
Yeah,
it's a valid point, Rodney, because if you look at the development projects out there at the moment, where they're basically saying, well, you're going to get on average around about 20% return, which is payable in 3 years' time when the project's up and running. But what people don't realize is that is also very subjective, because the building has to be sold. Yeah. For you to get that return, the development has to be sold. And people don't realize that as well, to say, right, I'm putting my money into development, or even a REIT for that matter, but I'm going to get 20% on average. So I'm going to get 60% in year 3. But it's also very subjective to, can the developer sell those buildings? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to, where is the developer building? Because it's now, certain places it's very slow. The market is slow. They can't get rid of the inventory. So which means, are you going to get your money back in 3 years' time? Yeah. All these little things, and these are questions that people need to ask. Either ask themselves or ask the EMD or whoever they're dealing with when they're investing, to say, what is the intention? What is going to be happening? Like with us, I'm grateful that we're doing the buy and hold strategy first, because you're right. If we can't get this concept right, how the hell are we going to get the development side right?
Yeah,
exactly. It's a really good point. That's a really good point. Sharon, my mom, she just mentioned that the nice thing about obviously what we're doing is that it's a tangible investment that you can see, feel, and touch, unlike a mutual fund, which is, not that. So really good point as well. I think we covered a lot of ground today. I hope this is helpful. I want to commit to doing these more often. We have a lot to share. We're learning a lot every single day, and want to be sharing what we're learning and being engaged. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to us. We are here to help. If you want any more information on WealthShare, you can just go to wealthshare.ca. And please reach out anytime. We'd love to have one-on-one conversations with you as well. Does anyone else have anything else to add?
Oh, just to say to that, if there's other topics people want to explore, like we'd love to talk about it. I mean, we're passionate about this, obviously, and we like having the conversations. Even as we're problem solving, sometimes it's good to just stop and talk about the concept. So if there's an aspect that you're looking at, a deal, whatever it is, like, you know, firing out those ideas are there's lots of different, like we keep saying, that's another subject for another day. Well, those conversations are great. And so, you know, if there's something you want to be involved in the conversation or have us talk about and then ask the questions privately or publicly, you know, that's what keeps us, you know, we will do this more often, largely because of that. It's a conversation we like having, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, we should have a podcast, the WealthShare Corner.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the first episode. We didn't even know.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe this is the first episode. Yeah, I'll have to put a disclaimer on it. The more I talk, the more likely some of those colorful words will slip out.
But it does give everybody an insight what our conversations are.
Yeah. This was very PG compared to.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your night.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, guys.